All right, welcome Forensic Biology. This is going to be your final study guide review. I'll be going over kind of your study guide with you, looking into something, cover the cases, some of the people for each chapter. Your study guide is on Google Classroom. I would advise you to print that out and then follow along with this, going over the 4 chapters. Your final is not a cumulative final or comprehensive final, meaning that it's not going to be based on the whole entire year. It's only going to be based on the 4 chapters that we have covered in distance learning. As you know, we haven't had any tests for it, so this is going to be your tests for your distance learning. Now you have 30 or so questions from quizzes. I will be emailing those quizzes. I can't email you results because I still have people that haven't taken quizzes. So I will need to. I will email you the actual quiz questions. The answers won't be on there. So if you have a question about an answer, best way to do it is to ask a question on Google Classroom. And that way someone else can answer the question, or it notifies me and I can help you with that question a little bit more time urgent compared to an email. Okay, so we are going to cover chapter 5, chapter 11, chapter 12, and chapter 14 in the final. So let's get carried away with chapter 5, forensic botany. Okay, so describe different forms of forensic botany evidence. Discuss botanical evidence can solve crimes by linking a person or object to a crime scene. Establishing postmortem interval or aiding in the location of grave sites. So grave sites alone, you're going to be able to find those based on different characteristics. You will need to know those for the test, mainly being a new grave versus an old grave. A new grave is going to have a mound, okay, and as time settles, that is going to then deplete into a sunken or a depression. You're also going to get new grass or new what is assemblage around there. Okay, so you're going to have different plants than what is typically normal. Pretty much you're destroying it and you're creating a new environment, so therefore you get new plants. A post-mortem interval, you're pretty much going to take the botanical evidence and you're going to determine how long they died based on your results of growing and seeing how long it takes for said plant to reach whatever you collected it at that state of decomposition or anything like that. And also it links a person to the crime scene based on pollen profile, diatoms, or spore profile. Pretty much microscopic evidence that plants leave behind that creates a profile that is only certain is only that gives you a certain area as well as a certain time of the year because of certain numbers. In the spring there's more, in winter there's less, things like that. Discuss the history of forensic botany, explain the terms. I'm not going to go over vocab with you for the most part. Summarize gymnosperms, angiosperms, seedless plants, fungi in terms of providing botanical evidence. Explain why botanical evidence is often overlooked. One, it's microscopic and people don't think about it. Here, gymnosperms are going to be like your cone plants, your conifers. Angiosperms are your flower plants. Seedless plants being that that are going to use spores. Same thing with fungi. So these here, seedless and fungi, are going to use spores. And then gymnosperms and angiosperms are going to have pollen. That's the main thing you need to know. Okay. Summarize the difference between botanical evidence collection and habitat sampling. So collecting evidence, that's going to be more like collecting pollen and things like that. Habitat sampling is like, say, example, if there's a broken branch, taking evidence from that, sampling that evidence, and comparing the two. So evidence collection is what you find at the crime scene. Habitat sampling is going to be in that area. So you're creating kind of a baseline for the most part. Because most of the time you're looking at it, if you find the crime scene being out in the habitat, then it's not that hard. As it's already there. Okay, but if you are doing an autopsy or something like that, and you find out that it has this pollen, this blah blah blah, then you would have to take a sample from the habitat and compare. That's seen in the case, the pond attack, where the two boys were beat over the head with a bat. And what happened is they matched the pollen in the boots to the pollen on the victims. And 14 out of the 15 diatoms were present. And the reason why they matched it is that was consistent with all three. So that's pretty much what's happening is you find the evidence and then you match it with habitat sampling. All right, going on. Microspore or spore versus pollen grain. Here's the differences here. You can go ahead and look into that. Here's all the terms: an angiosperm flower plant, gymnosperm cone. Paleontology is a study of spores, pollen and spores. Forensic botany is study of plant evidence used in crime. Pistil is going to be the part of the female stamen being part of the plant as well, or the flower, I should say. Spores, how they reproduce non-seedless plant or seedless plants. Okay, pollen fingerprint is what's going to be used to match it to a area. This is what is called a diatom here, which is not on here, which is weird. But a diatom is similar to that of a spore for the most part, or pollen, but it can give a location of water, matching the different diatoms collected on the victim, and so forth. So how is it that they are transferred or pollinated? One, spores are going to use pretty much just eject the spores, spray them out, shoot them out, and fertilize that way. Angiosperms are either going to use bees or wind. That's another way. The two most common way. Your pine trees are going to use wind, that yellow dusty stuff on the pine trees. That's the pollen. Bees here are going to take the pollen and deposit it onto others. Okay. Here you have examination of a crime scene. Looking at it, like I said, you're going to have differences in the assemblage or the plants around it. You're going to have disturbed dirt, stuff like that. That's going to help with understanding where to look and things like that. What else? I'm looking at the study guide here. Pretty much what we need to know is that botanical evidence is going to link a suspect to a place. Okay. It can also be used to create a PMI based on the decomposition of a plant or growth of a plant, and that's going to be seen here. This person here, Dr. David Hall, he's examining what was a tibia bone that was found right in here. Okay, that tibia bone was on a leaf, which was a mature leaf, and then he goes through a 3-step process as to how to create a PMI to even identify that person. So first off, you find a tibia bone, you don't know who that belongs to. You can determine whether it's animal or a human, okay, based on appearance, but then you don't know who that tibia bone is. So what they did, or what he did, was he created a first PMI based on the the yellow decomposition of the leaf, where the bone is placed on top of the leaf, and you have yellowing or dying of that leaf because it's not getting sunlight. So that was the first part. The second part was an amount of time it took for that leaf to grow in that area to a mature leaf. So he took his second part of the PMI based on that. And then finally, the third part was based on the dog or they had bite marks on it of what seemed to be a dog taking the bone. And the amount of time for that to happen, for a dog to rip apart the tibia of the lower leg, and he collected all those three and created a PMI. Now, that doesn't identify the person, but what they do is they take that PMI, or the postmortem interval, and then they use that time and go back to missing persons report, and then ex facto, you find out who you have. Okay, so you do need to know that. It's called the Goldhead branch murder. Dr. David Hall, he plays into it. You can look on it on pages 116 to 117, but he goes through this 3-stage process. This is the pond attack. We talked about diatoms. This is the case as far as the pond attack. It's important to know because it uses diatoms and how diatoms can be used to link somebody to a place. Okay. So once again, it's not necessarily direct. It doesn't, because there's mud on this person's boot, doesn't mean they proved it, but it does link the suspect to that location. So you will need to find other information as well, or other evidence to make it so that they, direct evidence that they can use. This one here is a famous case. Charles Lindbergh, famous aviator. His son was kidnapped, and pretty much what happened was they paid a ransom with marked bills. Later on down the road, that person used one of those bills, got caught, and then forensic scientists went through his place, around his area, and they matched the wood of the ladder used to get rid of the body and of his house. They matched it simply based on two things. One being these tree rings. As they're cut, these the trees are going to have the exact same, or their own unique. It's kind of like the fingerprint for an individual. The tree rings are going to be their fingerprint. Okay, they're going to have their own set of tree rings. They're not all the same on all trees, and these light dark areas are going to respond to the different times of growth. Thicker is better, thinner is a worse time of growth. Okay, so if these match up, it's from the same piece of wood. So the wood in the ladder, the rings, matched up with that of his house. Okay, and also you have what are planting marks, which is kind of like, think of it as like rifling in a barrel. It's these kind of marks that are made when the lumber is being processed and made, which then they're able to track and trace that back to the distributor, which then they're able to track that to the actual person that bought it. Okay, just like you would a typical bill of sale, or for the most part, and linking the evidence to that person for where the body was found. So that's pretty much how they used the cases for that. Yeah, I'm not going into vocab. You need to go into that. Oh, the one person I do want to talk about, two other people, Jane Bach. She's from the University of Colorado. She does a lot with some of the cases in the book. She's mentioned on pages 114 through 116, so you need to look at some of her findings as far as how she has contributed. Dr. Hall, we've already talked about him. The one I do want, and we didn't really cover this in class, but we will cover this, it will be on your final, is Dr. Max Frey. He's a Swiss criminalist. He's done many different things, but his biggest claim to fame is using a pollen profile on the shroud of Turin, which is the clothing that Jesus was wrapped in the tomb, and he proved that this was the clothing at that time, at that location. So this belongs there. It wasn't just placed there in the tomb after Jesus had resurrected. It was that exact clothing. So that was from Dr. Frey, if you're looking, Frey, however you want to pronounce it, from the Chapter 5 section of the study guide. We will continue on to Chapter 11. as we finish up this section, and then we'll cover chapter 12 and chapter 14 in the next section. This will be broken up into two. Chapter 11 describes several examples of the ways the forensic entomology is used to help solve crimes. Compare and contrast the 4 stages of blowfly metamorphosis and describe the significance of blowflies in forensic entomology. This is important. Okay, this is kind of like the baseline. Okay, so blowflies create a baseline, and that this metamorphosis is these stages. So you have egg, you have larva. There are 3 stages of larva. You have a pupa, and then finally an adult stage. Okay, so the amount of time is what's going to be from each of those stages is going to be what's used to create a PMI. Yes, you will have to use that, but I'll go over it a little bit with you. Describe the function of each of the following organs on blowflies and explain the significance of the structure of forensic entomology. Spiracles to breathe, mouth hooks to eat, crop to help digest. Okay, it's to break up. It's not actually digested or absorbed, so it's going to break up stuff. So the crop, you can actually find DNA of what it's eaten, toxicology, stuff like that. Describe the effect of different environmental factors on insect development. First off, temperature. They use their environment to maintain their temperature. So at night, there's not a lot of bug activity. They do not oviposition, which is lay eggs. Okay, so they do not lay eggs at night. There's not a lot of movement, not a lot of stuff during the night, or shaded areas or colder areas. So it usually excels more in hotter temperature, sunlight, stuff like that. Also things, if it's buried, if it's wrapped, if it's got clothing on, those all come into effect. Describe the 5 stages of decomposition. We're not necessarily going to get into that this chapter. We will cover that in the chapter 12, death, manner, mechanism, cause, manner, mechanism. I don't know, something like that. Chapter 12, death. Insect succession, we will cover that. Pretty much what that is one insects are going to come, and then the next, and then the next, and so forth. You have the succession of insects that are going to happen. How do you interpret forensic evidence and environmental conditions to estimate a post-mortem interval? Go over that. Explain how insect evidence is analyzed to provide evidence of the deceased person's identity of drug, poison, toxin. That is all based on this right here, this structure of the crop. Okay, all of that can be their identity, their DNA, poison or toxicology coming in there as well, because that structure of them it's not going to digest. Okay, absorb. So it's still going to be fully in there. So here are spiracles. Here's the instar 1 spiracle, instar 2 spiracles, instar 3 spiracles. These are what they use to breathe. They are located on the butt of the maggot or the larva. The mouth hooks are going to be on the mouth, so they're pretty much face in the decomposing body, but in the air they're able to eat and burrow deeper and deeper. Okay, here's a metamorphosis or a life cycle. You have eggs, kind of look like rice, and then you have larva 1, larva 2. You can kind of see this gray structure here. That's going to be the crop. Larva 3 here. Okay, then pupa, and then finally adult mature fly there. All right, let's talk a little bit about insect succession. Okay, first off, going through this, you're going to be, these complete metamorphosis is going to help you determine a timeline, or what is a PMI, in order for that to occur. Okay, and what they do is they're going to collect all the evidence. Pretty much they're going to collect the casings or the largest larvae, and they're going to raise them in similar conditions, environmental conditions. So not only are they collecting the evidence at the crime scene, but they're also going to collect meteorological evidence in the area for the previous, so many days or whatever they end up finding based on this PMI here. So they have to create what is an average temperature, an average environmental conditions, and raise them into a time in which they can create a PMI. And if they don't know the person, then they can use missing persons and things like that can they then can find out who that is. But here's the different stages, how long it takes for the blowflies to go through. So if you find certain evidence on a body, you can just trace it back to how long it takes and create a PMI based on that. Now, once you have the blowflies, you're going to get a beetles after that. Okay, these are the most common animals in the world. Beetles, insects really being the biggest. I believe there's 6 million different types of insects. So beetles being the largest of those. So you will need to know and understand the different beetles, what they eat, things like that. So it'll be important to kind of write that down. I may give it to you on the test. If I were you, I'd write it down. Okay. But flies first. Blowfly is going to be the first attracted by odors, and then beetles are going to be attracted by blowflies. Okay, so fly eggs, maggots, beetle larvae, and so forth, and then kind of the succession after that. Cases. Okay, I do want to talk about one case. That case being the Casey Anthony case. You will have other case on there. That case being the Paul Matz case of massive maggots. That is where he collected maggots from the nose, other parts of the area of the body. One maggot being a lot larger than the other, and that's because there's cocaine in the nose. So therefore, those that were on cocaine were larger. They ate more. They did more. Therefore, they were larger. Now, Casey Anthony trial is a famous trial. And what happened is a grandmother pretty much had a concern about her daughter's, I think it was her daughter's, car smelling of like dead body. So pretty much what happened is these people are the people that smelled it. There was concerns. They ended up finding this here in this dump site or whatever, this area. They found this trash bag for whatever reason. And then you have Dr. Haskell. There he is. Dr. Neil Haskell, a specialist in the field, states that there's evidence of coffin flies, knowing that the body was wrapped up in a trash bag, concealed. That's because coffin flies can get into the smallest of spaces. They're very small. There's evidence of that. So he testifies saying that there's evidence of coffin flies, stating that it was sealed up and put in and stayed in the car for a long period of time. His defender, or the counter argument, what the defenders used was that these flies weren't there for the body; they're eating for the trash. Okay, but being the expert that he is, saying that coffin flies are not related or have anything to do with trash. They feed on decomposition, so therefore they wouldn't eat trash. They would eat flesh. So therefore, eventually the trial ended up being she ended up not being guilty. But as far as how entomology was used into it, that was the evidence there. This was pretty much what happened was mom was accused of suffocating her own daughter, bagging her, and then getting rid of her. And the flies and the evidence, the bite marks, the flies found on the body would be all conclusive with wrapping it and storing it into a body or into a car. So that's Chapter 5, Forensic Botany, and Chapter 11, Forensic Entomology, as Part 1 of your final study guide review. We will finish Chapter 12 and Chapter 14 on next section, going over death and then anthropology. So we will finish up, and then you will have your final. Like I said, about 100 questions, multiple choice. That's about 25 questions from each chapter. So I'll be breaking it down a little bit, looking at previous quizzes, what questions are good. Maybe I need to use the same question. Maybe I can change the question if we didn't get it right or didn't do too well on it. I can change it, reword it, or something like that. But I would study the quizzes, study your study guide. Okay, your study guide is a little vague, a little broad, so you need to be able to understand what it is that you're looking into. What does it mean? What does forensic botany mean? What does forensic entomology mean? Why is it important? Those are the questions that you need to be answering. Okay, and it's more than just a one sentence answer. All right. So tune in next time.